craziest part about wealthy HOA neighborhoods is that the people running them eventually start believing they own reality itself. Not the streets, not the sidewalks, not the landscaping contracts, reality. And the woman at the center of this story acted exactly like that. Hearing this honestly blew my mind because the level of entitlement here sounds fake until you realize people like this actually exist in real life. This whole situation started on a tiny luxury hillside community overlooking the Aegean Sea, where white Santorini-style villas sat stacked above each other like polished marble trophies for rich retirees and vacations. Investors? Every home had infinity pools, imported stone terraces, and strict HOA regulations that controlled everything from flower colors to outdoor lighting brightness after sunset. And right in the middle of that nightmare sat one woman who treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. The homeowner telling this story had spent years building his dream villa there after cashing out of a logistics company, quiet guy, private, the kind of person who just wanted ocean views, wine at sunset, and zero drama. But his next-door HOA board president absolutely could not tolerate people who didn't bow to her authority, especially when she discovered he technically owned something that gave him leverage over the entire neighborhood without even realizing it yet. And the second she decided to teach him a lesson, she accidentally triggered one of the most expensive HOA disasters imaginable. What happened next completely turned the entire community upside down. 2. The homeowner had purchased the Santorini-style villa during a period when luxury overseas-inspired communities were exploding in popularity across coastal resort towns. The development marketed itself as Mediterranean serenity for elite homeowners, which was basically corporate language for charging absurd HOA fees while policing everyone's patio furniture. Still, the property itself really was incredible. White stucco walls reflected the sunset like gold, narrow stone walkways twisted between terraces covered in olive trees, and nearly every balcony faced open water. From the outside, the neighborhood looked like a postcard. But behind the scenes, the place operated more like a gated dictatorship, with decorative fountains. The HOA president, a woman named Celeste, had lived there since the community's original construction phase nearly 15 years earlier, and over time, she had transformed from a volunteer board member into something much worse. The unofficial ruler of the hillside. Bro, hearing stories like this always amazes me because there's a very specific type of HOA personality that slowly starts treating bylaws like sacred scripture. That was exactly her. She monitored landscaping personally. She issued complaints over curtains visible from exterior windows. She once fined a homeowner because their outdoor dinner party music could allegedly be heard echoing too aggressively. After 9 p.m., that's exactly how people act in real life when they get tiny amounts of authority and nobody pushes back for years. Most residents tolerated her because many of them were seasonal owners who only stayed a few months each year. Fighting the HOA simply wasn't worth the energy. But the homeowner in this story, Marcus, had moved there permanently after retiring early. He actually lived in the neighborhood full-time, which immediately made him a problem in Celeste's eyes because permanent residents noticed things vacation owners ignored. 3. At first, the issues seemed small. Celeste complained about the shade of blue used on his terrace cushions even though the color matched approved guidelines. Then she started leaving printed violation notices taped to his gate over ridiculous technicalities. One claimed his potted lemon trees exceeded acceptable Mediterranean symmetry standards, which honestly sounds insane even repeating it. Another cited him because delivery trucks parked in front of his villa for too long during furniture installation. Every interaction carried the same smug energy of someone trying to establish dominance. Marcus mostly ignored her. He had spent decades negotiating freight contracts and dealing with corporate egos. A retired HOA tyrant didn't intimidate him. And honestly, that probably irritated Celeste even more, because people like that thrive on emotional reactions. When they can get one, they escalate. The neighborhood itself sat on a steep coastal incline, which meant utilities were routed in unusual ways during construction years earlier because the terrain made traditional infrastructure expensive. Developers had created a shared underground water distribution system connected through a main supply line that crossed multiple properties before branching outward. Most homeowners never thought about it. Water came out of faucets, pools filled normally, end of story. But Marcus eventually learned something strange while reviewing old property surveys during a refinancing process. A large underground utility corridor carrying the primary uphill supply line actually crossed beneath a section of his property. The easement allowed neighborhood access for maintenance, but legally, the pipe itself physically sat inside his land boundaries before branching into the upper villas. Now here's where things started getting really interesting. For the original developer had apparently negotiated temporary utility access decades ago before the HOA formally incorporated, and somewhere during years of board turnover, everyone slowly forgot the exact ownership structure surrounding the infrastructure. The HOA maintained the system operationally, but the physical supply junction rested beneath Marcus's parcel according to county documentation. Marcus didn't think much about it initially because he wasn't looking for conflict. He simply filed the documents away with other property records. But meanwhile, Celeste was becoming increasingly obsessed with targeting him. Things exploded after Marcus installed a rooftop pergola over part of his terrace lounge area. The structure complied with height regulations, matched community aesthetics, and had full architectural approval from the city. But Celeste absolutely hated it because technically, the pergola partially obstructed the ocean view from a narrow corner of her upstairs guest bathroom window. And yes, seriously, that was apparently the issue. She immediately began sending violation notices claiming the pergola created visual disharmony within the coastal identity vision of the neighborhood. Bro, hearing phrases like that makes me lose my mind because HOA people really invent corporate fantasy language to justify personal grudges. Marcus responded calmly each time by attaching city approval documents and HOA design committee signatures, proving everything was legal. That should have ended it. Instead, Celeste started escalating publicly. She cornered neighbors during community wine socials and complained that Marcus was disrespecting neighborhood standards. She implied he was exploiting legal loopholes to undermine property values. She even convinced a few board members that his pergola represented a dangerous precedent for future architectural non-compliance. The situation turned uglier during an HOA meeting held inside the community clubhouse overlooking the marina. According to multiple residents, Celeste spent nearly 20 minutes ranting about preserving community integrity while indirectly targeting Marcus without saying his name outright. Everyone knew exactly who she meant though. And when Marcus calmly stood up and explained his project had full legal approval, Celeste reportedly snapped and accused him of thinking he was above the neighborhood. That was the moment the entire atmosphere changed, because from that point forward, it stopped being about the pergola. It became personal. Over the next several weeks, Marcus noticed increasingly bizarre maintenance issues around his property. Landscaping crews suddenly skipped sections of his hillside garden. HOA contractors delayed scheduled exterior touch-ups. Security gate access for his guests mysteriously malfunctioned multiple times. Every issue carried plausible deniability individually, but together the pattern became obvious. Then came the water incident. One brutally hot afternoon during peak tourist season, Marcus returned home after a marina dinner meeting and discovered his entire villa water supply had stopped working. Faucets sputtered dry air. Toilets wouldn't refill. Pool filtration systems shut down. Irrigation lines died instantly under the afternoon heat. At first he assumed it was a neighborhood outage. But when he stepped onto the terrace, he noticed nearby villas still had running water. Infinity pools overflowed normally. Garden sprinklers sprayed across adjacent properties. Only his home had been cut off. And almost immediately, he knew exactly who was behind it. Marcus contacted the HOA emergency maintenance number and received no answer. He emailed the board. No response. He finally drove directly to the management office where an assistant awkwardly informed him there had been temporary service adjustments due to ongoing compliance disputes. Compliance disputes? Bro, that sentence alone would have sent most people into orbit. Marcus demanded clarification, and eventually one nervous employee admitted Celeste personally authorized temporary suspension access to his section, pending review of unresolved violations connected to unauthorized exterior modifications, which was complete nonsense because the pergola had already been approved months earlier, and the entire thing was retaliation. And honestly, this is where the story becomes unbelievable, because most people in Marcus' position would immediately clear up and start screaming. But Marcus didn't react emotionally at all. In fact, according to later accounts, he became strangely calm, and that's always the moment in these stories where, something devastating is about to happen. Because while Celeste believed she had isolated one homeowner to force compliance, she had absolutely no idea whose property the main uphill water supply actually crossed through. Marcus spent the first night without water, sitting quietly on his upper terrace overlooking the dark coastline while the rest of the neighborhood sparkled with luxury lighting below the cliffs. Most people would have exploded immediately. But the scary thing about calm people is that they usually start thinking strategically instead of emotionally. And honestly, hearing this part completely blew my mind, because the level of patience he showed here was unreal. He wasn't interested in yelling matches or dramatic HOA confrontations. He wanted documentation, leverage, and timing. 7 the next morning, he contacted a property attorney who specialized in utility easements and coastal infrastructure disputes. Within hours, survey maps, construction permits, and original development filings started resurfacing from county archives, and the deeper they dug, the worse it became for the HOA. Turns out the neighborhood's entire upper water distribution system depended on a pressure-regulated mainline installed decades earlier beneath what was now Marcus's parcel. Not near it, not adjacent to it, directly beneath it. Even crazier, the original developer had never legally transferred full infrastructure ownership to the HOA after incorporation. Maintenance authority existed, but the actual easement language only granted access rights for servicing and emergency repair. That distinction became absolutely catastrophic once attorneys reviewed the wording carefully, because according to the documents, unauthorized interference involving connected service delivery on Marcus' property potentially constituted utility misuse and breach of easement protections. In simple terms, Celeste had just weaponized infrastructure located on land she didn't control. That was incredible. Marcus's attorney immediately advised them not to retaliate directly. Instead, they began collecting evidence quietly. Emails, maintenance logs, security footage from the HOA office parking lot, recorded voicemail timestamps. Every single detail mattered now. Meanwhile, Marcus booked himself into a luxury harbor hotel and let the HOA believe he was inconvenienced and cornered. But behind the scenes, engineers were already reviewing something much bigger. The uphill villas depended on constant pressure balancing from that central line. If improper valve adjustments occurred at the wrong junction points, pressure instability could damage pumps, filtration systems, irrigation grids, and even structural plumbing inside the upper homes. And according to maintenance records, Celeste had personally instructed an uncertified contractor to alter valve access near Marcus's connection point in order to shut off his villa specifically. Bro, hearing that made me pause for a second, because that is exactly how people with unchecked authority destroy themselves. They stop respecting systems they don't fully understand. Meanwhile, the neighborhood rumor mill exploded. Some residents believed Marcus failed to pay HOA dues. Others thought he violated architectural rules so severely that enforcement action became necessary. Celeste quietly encouraged those assumptions during casual conversations around the mall's community clubhouse. She framed the situation like an example of the HOA protecting standards. That's exactly how these people operate in real life. They rewrite the narrative before facts come out. But then, small problems started appearing uphill. One villa reported fluctuating water pressure during evening showers. Another homeowner noticed cloudy sediment near pool refill lines. A retired couple complained their outdoor irrigation system began sputtering violently every morning. At first, nobody connected the issues together. Luxury communities always have occasional maintenance hiccups. Then 3 separate uphill homes lost water entirely for almost 2 hours during a Saturday afternoon. Panic started spreading fast. 9 residents flooded the HOA office demanding answers because this wasn't some middle-class subdivision where people tolerated inconvenience quietly. These were multi-million-dollar properties filled with wealthy owners who expected perfection 24 hours a day. Angry emails hit the board non-stop. Contractors scrambled across maintenance tunnels. Emergency plumbers started appearing throughout the hillside, carrying pressure gauges and excavation tools. And right in the middle of that chaos, Marcus's attorney submitted a formal legal notice to the HOA board. The letter accused the association of unauthorized infrastructure manipulation, retaliatory service interference, easement misuse, and potential civil liability tied to utility damages affecting connected homeowners. Even worse, the notice demanded immediate preservation of all maintenance, communications, and warned that further unauthorized adjustments beneath Marcus's property would trigger emergency court action. That single document changed everything because suddenly the board realized this wasn't just a petty HOA fight anymore. This had become a legal and financial nightmare capable of tearing the entire community apart. The moment the legal notice reached the HOA board, the atmosphere inside the community changed from arrogant confidence to full-blown panic. And honestly, this is the part where the story stopped feeling like normal HOA drama and started sounding like corporate sabotage. Multiple board members reportedly had no idea Celeste personally ordered the water shutoff. They thought maintenance crews were handling a minor compliance dispute involving landscaping, access, or temporary repairs. The second attorneys explained the liability exposure tied to infrastructure interference. Several members immediately began distancing themselves from her decisions, but the damage was already spreading. 10. Over the next 48 hours, pressure instability inside the uphill distribution system got dramatically worse. Engineers later discovered the unauthorized valve adjustments had thrown the balancing network completely out of balance. Calibration? Pool pumps began failing. Irrigation timers malfunctioned. One luxury rental property temporarily lost hot water entirely during a high-paying vacation booking, which triggered furious refund demands from guests. Bro, hearing this completely blew my mind because one petty HOA revenge stunt was now snowballing into losses worth tens of thousands of dollars across the neighborhood. And then came the inspection. Marcus's attorney hired an independent infrastructure engineering team to review the easement corridor beneath his property. The HOA assumed it would be a routine legal assessment. Instead, engineers uncovered something devastating buried inside the LA case original system layout. Years earlier, during a rushed expansion phase, contractors had installed several unofficial pressure bypass modifications without updating county records properly. Those undocumented changes technically violated regional utility compliance standards, which meant if regulators became involved, the HOA could face massive fines alongside mandatory reconstruction costs. That was the moment Celeste finally realized how badly she had miscalculated. According to later accounts from residents, she completely lost control during an emergency HOA board meeting inside the clubhouse. Witnesses described screaming, blame shifting, and accusations flying across the room while attorneys tried. Desperately to contain the situation, some board members demanded immediate settlement negotiations with Marcus before lawsuits escalated further. Others wanted Celeste removed as president immediately to limit financial exposure. But Marcus still hadn't made his actual move yet, and this part was incredible. 11. Because instead of demanding money up front, Marcus exercised a completely legal clause hidden inside the easement documentation. Since unauthorized infrastructure modifications and retaliatory service actions occurred beneath his property boundaries, his legal team temporarily suspended non-emergency access rights until a full compliance audit could be completed. In simple terms, no contractor could legally touch the main uphill supply corridor crossing his land without court authorization or his written approval. The entire upper neighborhood froze instantly. Emergency crews could still respond to catastrophic failures, but all non-essential maintenance and recalibration work stalled overnight. Wealthy homeowners who previously ignored the HOA drama suddenly found themselves trapped inside a growing infrastructure crisis because one power-hungry board president wanted revenge over a pergola due obstruction. That's exactly how entitlement destroys entire communities in real life. pressure problems intensified daily, pools turned cloudy, landscaping across upper terraces started browning under inconsistent irrigation. One homeowner reportedly lost thousands of dollars worth of imported hillside plants after automated watering systems failed repeatedly during peak summer heat. Angry residents flooded meetings demanding answers while lawyers circled the neighborhood like sharks, smelling blood. And then Marcus delivered the final blow. During a special community hearing attended by residents, board members, attorneys, and engineering consultants, Marcus's legal team presented the original county infrastructure maps on a massive projector screen. For the first time, homeowners saw exactly how dependent the entire upper hillside had become on utility corridors crossing Marcus's property. The room reportedly went silent. 12. Then engineers explained how Celeste's unauthorized interference directly triggered the instability crisis now threatening the neighborhood's systems, maintenance records, contractor communications. Unaccessed logs backed everything up, and there was no escaping it anymore. The woman who spent years acting like she owned the community had nearly crippled its infrastructure, trying to bully one homeowner. And the second that reality hit the residents, the entire neighborhood turned on her at once. Celeste resigned less than a week later, not gracefully either. According to several residents, she stopped attending meetings entirely after the hearing and communicated only through attorneys while the HOA scrambled to contain financial fallout. The board eventually negotiated a massive settlement package covering infrastructure repairs, legal costs, property damages, and reimbursement connected to the retaliatory water shutoff. Marcus could have dragged the entire situation through court for years, but instead he agreed to cooperate under one condition: complete restructuring of HOA oversight procedures and independent utility management moving forward. Honestly, that was probably the smartest part of the entire story, because instead of just humiliating one HOA president, he forced the entire community to confront how dangerous unchecked authority had become. And that's exactly how people should handle situations like this in real life. Calm, methodical, documented. Over the following months, engineers rebuilt portions of the water system properly, homeowners regained stable service, and several long-time residents pushed through reforms limiting board power permanently. Meanwhile, Marcus finally got his water restored, reopened his terrace overlooking the sea, and kept the pergola exactly where it was. And every sunset after that became a reminder that one petty power trip nearly destroyed an entire luxury neighborhood. 13. Bro, stories like this are exactly why HOA revenge situations explode online so fast, because they tap into something painfully real. Everybody has met someone like Celeste before, the kind of person who mistakes temporary authority for absolute control. And honestly, the wildest part is that none of this started over money, property damage, or some huge legal issue. It started because one woman couldn't handle the fact that another homeowner refused to submit to her ego. That's exactly how these situations spiral in real life, and Marcus handled it in the smartest way possible. No screaming, no public meltdown, no reckless revenge. He let documentation, patience, and the law completely destroy the HOA's position from the inside. And that was incredible to hear, because most people underestimate how powerful calm strategy becomes against emotional authority figures. Also, shutting off someone's water over a pergola dispute has to be one of the most absurd HOA power trips ever. But somehow, it still feels believable. And honestly, that's the craziest part of all. The funniest part about this whole disaster is that Celeste probably thought she was creating one small inconvenience to force compliance. Instead, she accidentally exposed years of hidden infrastructure problems, triggered legal chaos, lost her position, and turned the entire neighborhood against her over a view complaint from a guest bathroom window. Bro, hearing that still blows my mind. Stories like this prove that HOA bullies almost always collapse the second someone finally understands the rules better than they do. And honestly, Marcus sitting peacefully under that pergola afterward feels like the perfect ending to the entire situation.